Hey guys, welcome back to Canon Cinema. I'm Amanda, otherwise known as AMX NDA Reviews on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Today I will be reviewing the prequel to The Sopranos, The Many Saints of Newark. Now, I absolutely love mob films. I grew up with them. I love the brotherhood, the loyalty, the level of respect. And that is something that has stayed with me growing up. And that's why The Irishman is still, one of the best films to date. And I love it so much. But with The Many Saints of Newark, I was conflicted with it. I really was. The Sopranos made such an impact, and James Gandolfini was absolutely brilliant as Tony Soprano. So to do a prequel of a character like Dicky Moltisanti, you need to have that connection to Tony Soprano. We are showing a young Tony Soprano. The whole point of The Many Saints of Newark was to show the way that Tony was raised, what impacted him, why he had certain levels of trauma growing up, what made Tony Soprano tick in The Sopranos. That was the whole point of the prequel, is to see Tony and the way he was raised, the way he was brought up, because they only showed certain pieces of his childhood in the actual show. So that was the one thing that I was looking forward to, because you got his son. You got Michael Gandolfini playing a character that his dad was known for. So you have Michael Gandolfini coming in halfway through this film, and that's where you kind of get annoyed. And there was a half hour of just getting to know Dicky Moltisanti, and Alessandro Nivola did a fantastic job. I think he had very little to work with, but he really brought his A game for Moltisanti, and he did a good job. But unfortunately, the direction and the storylines that muddled up the first half of this setup with a very, very young Tony Soprano, it just didn't work for me. Not only didn't it work as a prequel because of what the show was about and what the movie was supposed to be about, it didn't work as a mob film by itself whatsoever. And I think that there were too many storylines that didn't really come together. So within the first half hour of this, there are two very different storylines happening. And Tony Soprano's storyline, little Tony Soprano, doesn't get much screen time. And yes, I understand that as a kid, you observe and you absorb things that happen in your life, but the kid was not in this as much as I would have wanted him to be perfectly honest, because the story is supposed to be about him. But I do understand the more reserved part of it to kind of show how he was raised and that he wasn't that involved in family matters. He just would watch it unfold around him. So I understand that. I understand that they tried to have that connectivity between Dicky Moltisanti and a very young Tony Soprano. So they tried. But as much as I loved watching Leslie Odom Jr. in this film, the storyline of Harold McBriar really was used inappropriately to offset what was happening with Moltisanti and his family. I think that they were just using that entire storyline as convenience, considering what happens with Moltisanti, his dad, and what happens later on. So I just think that it was out of convenience and that they didn't actually care about the riots in Newark. I just think it was more of like a presentation that this is what also was happening, but this is how it correlates to what Moltisanti does within, with his actions that we see later on. So I think it was used inappropriately. I don't think that they should have had an entirely separate storyline for it in order to set up certain things that were graphic and violent. And I just think that that entire section should have just been cut out if you weren't going to write it properly. And I may be alone in that. I may be in the minority with that, but I don't think that that should have been a focus if we're, again, doing a prequel to The Sopranos about Tony Soprano. I think that they were trying to do too much, and I don't think they did enough research. They didn't dive into it properly. That is an angle that should have just been very minor and not completely fleshed out the way that they did it, because it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like you were telling the story in the way that it should have been told. And that's something that should be taken seriously on screen. And I think that they missed the mark on that entirely. So going back to the midway point of the Many Saints of Newark, where we do see Michael Gandolfini, I loved him. I loved that he really picked up on his dad's mannerisms, just everything that went into being Tony Soprano. You could see the makings of it. And I that's what I wanted from the beginning of this film. And that's what bothered me, is that we didn't get enough of that. I feel like Michael Gandolfini deserved more screen time. I feel like the way that this should have happened was that he was in training to be the next capo. And I think that is the mistake that they made, where they focused more on Moltisanti. But why should I care? Why am I caring? I understand that Michael Imperioli, who is Christopher Moltisanti, Dicky Moltisanti's son, is narrating this, and it's his story, but it just didn't make any sense considering what happens in The Sopranos. I don't think that this was a prequel that was written properly to match The Sopranos. And I watched it with my parents, who were like diehard Sopranos fans, and they also were very disappointed with this. And I think that's the key word, is that there's a handful of us that are disappointed because we wanted to see more of Tony. We wanted to see Michael Gandolfini, and I think that they missed the mark. I would have loved to see more of like Moltisanti introducing certain characters that we know in the show, where you just put, like, for example, you just put Paulie there in the background. You don't really know. You're guessing that it's them, but you don't have that cohesiveness within the familia. And I think that is the biggest miss in a mob movie, is that you had Dicky Moltisanti, yeah, but he was just completely removed from the family. And I think that is something that mob movies do so well, is create that sense of community, the chemistry, the camaraderie. That's what you have in a mob film. And they're all about family and the family unit, and your friends being family and looking out for one another. That is what I did not get at all with the Many Saints of Newark, and that is a serious miss when it comes to a mob film. The pacing of this film made it seem like it was 4 hours long and I was watching a mini series. This movie is 2 hours and it felt so long. It dragged out. There was no importance to these characters, and why I should care. Why should I care about Dicky Moltisanti? Even if he is one of the worst people in the world, like any protagonist in a mob film, no matter how horrible they are of a person, you still want to watch it unfold, and you are invested, you're interested in what they're going to do. I did not care, unfortunately. I did not care for Dicky Moltisanti. And again, we have John Bernthal, who constantly knocks out of the park with the 5 minutes of freaking screen time that this guy gets. He was great as Tony's dad. Did we see enough of him? No. There are moments in The Sopranos where he does talk about his father and his childhood and all of that. We needed to see that. We needed to see Tony and his dad. We need to see more, more of like Tony and his mom and his family life. And that's what needed to happen with this prequel. And Moltisanti should have just been a secondary character. I think they kind of twisted it. You could still tell the story of Moltisanti in Tony's life and the impact that he made as a secondary character. And I think that would have worked a bit better as well, because again, you're forming Tony to be capo without actually saying that he's going to be capo. So I think that there's certain things that could have been changed, that could have worked better, but sadly, this is the movie that we got. Again, to Michael Gandolfini, he did a fantastic job. I would love to see a limited series of him being a young Tony Soprano on HBO. I think that is where this should have headed in the first place. And I would love to see more of him, because he did such a good job for his dad. He really did. So the other thing that you could take away from the Many Saints of Newark is that John Bernthal and Alessandro Nivola need to be in another mob film ASAP. Cast them, do it. They are so good, and they need to lead their own mob film, both of them. And the second thing you can take away is that if you watch The Many Saints of Newark, you have never watched The Sopranos, or you have watched The Sopranos, you're going to want to head back and start this series from the very beginning, because that's what I feel like doing. So that is my review of The Many Saints of Newark. I'm very disappointed with it. I really wanted to love it because mob films rarely ever get made anymore. And I truly do believe that Martin Scorsese made the last best one with The Irishman. So I hope they continue to make them, not once a year. I need a bit more because they're just so good, and I miss them. I really do. So if you guys enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe. You can always follow me over at AMXND Reviews on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. I'll catch you guys next time. Keep watching movies.